Good morning. Today, Monsignor Robert Meyer, better known as Father Bob, is here to tell us about the Waterfront Project, which provides legal assistance to low-income persons. Father Bob has been pastor of St. Teresa's Church in Summit for the last 5 years. He studied theology, receiving degrees from the Pontifical Gregorian University and the Lateran University in Rome, and also has a canon law degree from the Catholic University in Washington, D.C. But it was his civil law degree earned at Seton Hall University that led him to found the Waterfront Project. Prior to becoming pastor at St. Teresa's, he was pastor at St. Peter's Paul Parish in Hoboken. While there, parishioners learned he was also an attorney and began asking for legal advice. Realizing the need, he started a legal center in the church basement to provide pro bono legal representation to address civil legal issues and concerns of needy individuals. Father Bob will tell us how the Waterfront Project has grown and expanded in its assistance. Also with us today is Amy Alpert, also an attorney. She manages the day-to-day operations of the Waterfront Project. Unlike the baseball game last night, we do not have a weather delay, and Father Bob will lead off and Amy will bat cleanup.
Good morning, everyone. I have to tell you a little secret that it was at some point in my conversations with probably a parishioner at St. Teresa's, and he said casually, "You know, Father Bob, I was talking to the Summit Old Guard, and I don't even remember what the topic was." And I thought, well, that's really interesting, but I never knew that there was a real body called the Summit Old Guard. I thought he was just referring to some of his friends and his buddies. So I'm happy to finally meet the real bona fide Summit Old Guard in the flesh, in person, and those who join us on live stream. What a great organization as you continue to keep yourselves involved in the days of retirement. It reminds me of the story that when my dad retired, he was so fixed on retiring at 62. We had a retirement party for him, and in the middle of eating the cake, we said, "Dad, we have just one request for you. Now that you're retired, go and get a job." It sounds like you don't need that advice. You've already taken on so many other things. So Amy and I want to have a little bit of time with you just to share with you not only the work of the project, but the excitement of the project and the dynamics that happen in the project. It doesn't take too much of an examination to look into our world to see that there are many, many people in need. Maybe they're not always right before our eyes, but you don't have to go too far to find someone who's in need. And that becomes particularly pressing when that need goes to those things that we might call essential needs: shelter, food, support, healthcare. Many of those things, so many of us in this room take for granted. And I'm sorry to say that even in 2022, in this country, many of our friends who live not too far from us, and perhaps even in our midst, can't take any of those things for granted. I was taken by the picture of the front page of the New York Post yesterday that showed so many people living in tents in the Capitol. It's a stark reminder, a visual, that there's so much more work to be done. I appreciate George giving us a little bit of the history of the Waterfront Project, and it really happened probably by the work of the Holy Spirit. I was in front of the congregation in Hoboken, which, if you've been there recently, know it's many, many young families. And all around us every day, we continue to see more and more development, advancement, growth. And it made me wonder, in this mile-square city, 15 blocks by 15 blocks, where did the poor people go? What happened to them? And so a number of the folks who came regularly were also my students. At different points in my life, I've taught. I teach at Seton Hall, I teach at Stevens, and this afternoon my heart stop is to teach a business law course at Sacred Heart in Connecticut. Every Tuesday I'm there. And so I challenge the congregation to say, we cannot just pray inside the walls of the church without looking outside the windows. What can we do to make a difference? Hoboken had a homeless shelter that fed and housed people, 50 people a night, which was really a drop in the bucket. And I think my congregation there, and perhaps even many of us today, found consolation in that we did a little something. But I'm a firm believer in what the scriptures say, that to whom much is given, much is expected. And I felt that we could do so much more. And so a little committee was formed, and they met every other week or so for a number of months. And finally, their proposal was, if we will make a difference, we have to make a step. And the step was to found the Waterfront Project, to get it off the ground, and to let it run. And so as a commitment of our finance council, we gave 10% of our budget, which at that point was $50,000, to hire a part-time executive director 9 years ago. And with the $50,000, Elizabeth Caraballo, our first executive director, was charged with founding the corporation, attempting to build the board, starting to raise awareness and PR, and then ultimately receiving clients. And our first clients were all over the lot. There were people who had landlord-tenant issues. There were those who came who had immigration issues. There were some elderly people who needed to negotiate their lease. There were people who were fighting over contracts. And very quickly, the work started, as the word got out, to grow. Her initial way to solve this problem was to find colleagues, fellow attorneys, who could give us pro bono legal services. If I'm not mistaken, each of us is required to give 25 hours a year, which is also a drop in the bucket. Finding people who had that subject matter expertise and the willingness to work with us was not always easy. Additionally, as time goes on and you build a firm, which is ultimately what happens, there are lots of other costs that come. So Elizabeth had her work cut out. And the grants that existed all around us were kind of the chicken and the egg dynamic. You would apply for a grant and the grantor would say, but what have you done? And the answer is, at this point, we've done nothing. But if you give us some money, we can do something. So it was a challenge in the get-go, from the get-go. But I'm happy to report that as time went on, Elizabeth moved on and a second executive director came, and she was a little bit keener into how the grants work. And it's been a constant growth in the circle with outreach. Today, 2022, 9 years later, there are 18 of us on the team, 7 attorneys, housing counselors and resource navigators, and some infrastructure staff. We still continue to see the needs to grow. In fact, just yesterday, Amy and I interviewed a person to come on board to be a counselor, because when people present themselves for issues, they don't do it in a calm, focused, measured manner. They're emotional, they're nervous, they're anxious, and none of us have that training. So bringing someone else on board to address those human needs also continues to make a better quality project. I'm proud to say that today we have almost $2 million in grant money. So from 50,000 to 2 million is quite the step. We've expanded our services, which were primarily based in Hudson County, to have some opportunities to serve people in Union, in Bergen, and in other counties, depending on their needs and the parameters of the grant. And we continue to look at ways to expand and to support without becoming overwhelmed, but nonetheless to continue to meet the needs, which doesn't seem to have an end in sight. So my job since July 1st has been to be the interim director, because our most recent one left to move on to some other adventures. And so we're in the process of searching now for a permanent executive director. My role in the last 3 months has been to do things like this, to speak, to raise awareness, and to raise money for the other parts that are not covered by grants. I can tell you that being a person who now is hands-on and much more focused on the day-to-day work of what the incredible team of men and women do, it's awe-inspiring and very inspirational, not only for me as a priest, but also as a person, seeing people care for other people as they go forward to sort through the difficulties. So we're happy to share our story with you. We hope that if you have some interest or some ability to help us in any way, that you'll consider it. And I'd like to invite my colleague Amy, who manages the day-to-day operation and oversees the attorneys, who has her hands on in the actual client representation. She can share some stories and can also give us some of the more specific statistics that help you to understand the scope of the need that's out there. Thank you.
So, as you might be able to tell, I am 5 feet tall. And what that means is that for every courtroom that I've been in over the last 20 years, I usually bring a dictionary. And I stand on the dictionary so everyone can see me. So if you can't see me, please let me know. Are you good? I want to talk to you a little bit about the work of the Waterfront Project, and specifically some of the work that we do with seniors, because I think that might resonate for you. But I want to give you at first a sense of the scope of who we represent and what kind of work we're doing right now. The predominant work we're doing right now is in housing law. And we're doing that work for, we call it our tenant defense project. And that's a multidisciplinary set of tools that we have in order to help folks who are having trouble staying in their homes. One of the ways that that happens is, of course, that I go to court, as do 5 other attorneys, and we represent people in eviction proceedings. We also do work in the foreclosure arena. As some of you may know, there's been a real crisis during COVID of people being able to pay their mortgages. And the state has stepped in with a project they call IRMA, which will help people to pay their mortgages and remain in their homes. So we have an attorney and a housing counselor who work on that. We also have resource navigators who assist our clients in getting various different sorts of assistance to stay in their rental properties. And we also have housing counselors who are folks who help people to manage various conditions in their home, etc. The work at the Waterfront Project has been really educational for me. I'll tell you a little bit about my background, although I've been an attorney for 20 years, so I won't get too drawn into it. I came from the criminal defense world. I was a criminal defense attorney for 18 years. I found that the same people that I represented in very minor crimes, people who jumped turnstiles, who were committing small petty larcenies, were the people that I found when I came to the Waterfront Project. They were people who were so low on resources that they were living at the very edge of their ability to survive. And so what we were seeing was people who oftentimes didn't have a lot of faith or a lot of trust in us, because the system hadn't necessarily worked out great for them. And so a lot of our work is first to build a dynamic of trust in a very difficult time. And how we do that is a lot by listening. I have staff of very young attorneys, some of them. 2 of them I swore into the bar last week. And I learn from them every day. And one of the things that I learned from them is how to listen. One of them, Alex, who works with us, is a first-generation young man from Haiti who worked really hard to get his law degree. And he's not what one would call a traditional learner. And he had trouble with passing the bar, but what he doesn't have trouble with is understanding where our clients are coming from. He tells me things I don't know about our clients every day. And so I think we start with that. We start by listening to what our clients need. And with older folks, a lot of that is someone to recognize the level of loss they've experienced, particularly during COVID. A number of our clients who are facing foreclosure are folks who their partner has passed away. And so they're now in a position where they could afford their mortgage before their husband died or their wife died, but now they can't. And so when they come to us, the first thing that they're worried about is that they have to talk about this thing that's so painful. And so we start there, and then we work on the actual problem that we can actually address. But in order to do that, we have to make sure that they trust us. So we spend time and resources doing that. And we're really fortunate in Hudson County to have an incredible diversity of folks. I don't know if you guys know, but Jersey City is the most diverse city in the country. My son lives there with me, and he goes to a local elementary school. He's 10. And 43 languages are spoken in his school. So one of the challenges we face on a regular basis is making sure that we speak the language that our clients are speaking. And we represent probably 70% of our clients are people of color or people who've come from other countries. We're fortunate that Father Bob and the congregation that he started with were able to start this practice because, as some of you may know, there are other legal services organizations that provide civil legal services, particularly the Legal Services Corporation of America, which has venues in every part of the state and most parts of the country. But the charter of the Legal Services Corporation does not allow them to represent people who were not born in the United States, who are not citizens. And so, particularly in Jersey City and in Hudson County, but I think throughout New Jersey, we are able to provide services that other legal services providers are not able to. And so that's one of the areas that we do get to work on. Another thing that we're able to do is to really address complex problems. And one of those is a problem that we're facing with a older folks complex in Jersey City. We call it 222 St. Paul's. There are about 250 older folks who live there. It was originally, it started as a senior living, low-income housing venue, and the rents were very low. The folks were paying about $600 a month to live in a one-bedroom or a two-bedroom apartment. That was through the federal government, and the contract ended about 2 years ago. And suddenly, every person there was faced with the possibility of having to pay market rent. And starting about 6 months ago, we started getting phone calls from 10, 15, 20, 30 different folks who lived in the building saying, my rent is supposed to go up $800 on a fixed income. And we were very concerned. So we did what we usually do. We started by listening. We had a group of folks come to the Waterfront Project and tell us about what was happening. And then we developed a plan together. And so that's one of our most exciting things that we get to do. We're able to keep folks in their home, drawing from both their own understanding of what's going on and the trust that we build with them. Another story recently that we had engaged in is of an 84-year-old man I'm working with who has lived in his apartment for 45 years, worked as a sanitation worker for most of his career. He no longer does that job. He lives in a third-floor walk-up apartment, and his landlord became concerned that he wouldn't be able to get up the stairs and he'd hurt himself. And at first, her response to this was to ask him to move out, and that was a few years ago. And then her response was to raise the rent by $500 when he wouldn't leave. Now, he wouldn't leave because this was his home. And he felt strongly that he was safest there. When he wouldn't leave, and she raised the rent. She brought a case in court. And he wasn't able to get on the court system's website, and we're still appearing by Zoom. So he wasn't able to participate in the court proceeding. So one day, about a month ago, he got a knock on his door from the sheriff with an eviction notice saying that he had to leave in 3 days. His daughter called us, and we were able to get him back into the apartment. But that wasn't the end of our work. And so right now, the important work that we're doing is working with him to address his concerns so that we can get him safely moved out. The reality of the situation is, although it's his home and we want him to have that sense of home, his daughter, his landlord, and many other folks are very concerned about him continuing to walk up those stairs every day at 84 with neuropathy. And so our work doesn't end simply when the legal case ends. That's just my work. Then the hard work starts of our counselors, of our housing counselors, finding someplace that he's going to be comfortable with to stay. I think the work that we do at the Waterfront Project is more than just legal, is more than just housing counseling. I hope that what it is bringing folks into our family and our community and treating them, regardless of their income, their level of privilege, in a way that we would want to be treated. And to do that by providing comprehensive services, but more than that, to provide true problem solving with the resources and tools that we have. And so I'm happy to do the work. Many of you may have heard that there has been an eviction crisis in this country during the pandemic. And that's most certainly true. But I'm proud to say that during that eviction crisis, unlike the rest of the state, the rate of homelessness in Hudson County has gone down. It's gone down by 20%. And I'd like to think that we're a part of that because we work on problem solving as a community, and not just our agency, the Waterfront Project, but each of the groups in Hudson County to really address the concerns that we have as a community. And so I'm happy to share that, and we hope that with this kind of community-centered law practice, we can really work to continue this process and treat our community and heal our community from what COVID has done in this kind of way. So thank you so much for listening. I really appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Father Bob and Councilor Amy. And now let's see if we have any questions here in person, and then we'll go online. If there's no one here, perhaps I could take the speaker's prerogative and ask a question. I'd be very interested in what sort of legal tactics you typically employ when you're seeking to have someone not evicted from their premises. Is it the fact that landlords have not followed all of their legal obligations, et cetera, et cetera?
I don't want to give away too many of my secrets, but so I think there are two kinds of legal tactics that were used. One is actually not a legal tactic at all. We just get resources for people, so we pay their rent. In New Jersey, we have an unusually protective set of laws around eviction. In many other states, you could be evicted for any reason. In New Jersey, we have the Anti-Eviction Act. There are specific enumerated reasons, and it's actually pretty difficult to evict someone from their apartment. The problem is when it's non-payment of rent, the question is very simple. A trial could last 3 seconds. Have you paid your rent? No. Done. So we try not to get to that point. Instead, what we do is we try and find ways to help people pay their rent when that's the issue. And then also, I would say that delay is my friend. So a lot of what I do as an attorney is I help people to make sure that they have access to the processes that are in place for them. And by doing that, by asking for adjournments, by looking at the different procedures in court, I can make sure that we have the time we need to get the resources and make plans for folks. Sometimes we don't win and folks have to leave. But when they do, I think that the most important thing that we can do is help them to leave in a way that's safe and in a way that enables them to remain housed. And so sometimes my work is really to help to bring all of the resources to bear at the court to do that. So that's how we work.
Thank you.
Online, we have a question from John Tomaszewski.
Yes, hi, thank you. I'm glad you're doing all this good work for the city. My question is, once a landlord decides that he wants to evict somebody, how long does that process usually take?
That's a great question, and it's one that's really changed in the last couple of years. Before COVID, the process was about a month. What would happen is someone would get an eviction complaint served on them on their door. They'd go to court, and if they didn't have the money, then 10 days later, they were evicted. Recently, we've been fortunate, and the court has started to put processes in place. First, it was because of COVID, but they've continued because we realized that these are successful, both in getting landlords their money and in keeping people housed. And so right now, from start to finish, I would say it takes a year. So there's been an enormous difference.
Thank you.
Yeah, I'm guessing that renters as a group have very little political clout. Are you, or is it a strategy to go after politicians or go after some supportive, more powerful political entity, as opposed for better laws, rather than just doing the response to individual problems?
Absolutely. We're fortunate to have some very supportive folks in Hudson County politics who are very interested in this issue, but also throughout the state. And we work regularly with the Department of Community Affairs, which is the governor's source of reform. They have a very large anti-homelessness initiative that they're working on right now, and we're fortunate to be supported by that initiative.
Thank you. Mark Edelman has a question.
Thanks. I really have two questions. One of them is easy. Could you tell us what are the sources of your grants? And the other question is, have you dealt with people who couldn't get services simply because of the pandemic and the lack of access? I personally had a problem with the Social Security Administration.
Yes.
I'm wondering if you could tell us a little about that kind of thing.
So sure. In terms of the sources of our grants, we get some grants that are federal grants that are passed through a state organization to us. We get some state grants, we get some county grants, and a couple of cities also give us grants. Most of our resources right now are in the form of government resources in one way or another. And then we get support both through, we have a fundraiser coming up and a bunch of other private initiatives, and we get some grants through there as well. In terms of access, yes, during the pandemic, we had a lot of problems with folks who were trying to get access to services. There are regular subsistence services, but also to get their electricity turned back on, to get their heat turned back on. And some of the ways we dealt with that were mildly untraditional. I went out to people's houses and sat on their porch steps with them a lot of times. And so did a lot of the folks from our welfare administration, from our Social Security administration in town. We developed outdoor techniques of reaching out to folks because we were concerned about the spread of COVID. And a lot of folks are relying on electronic means. That's been a real problem, I have to say, for some of our folks. When the court system went online, very poor people oftentimes didn't have access to Zoom. They didn't have reliable technology. The same was true with some of our older folks, because that just wasn't what they knew. And that continues to be a problem for us. Sometimes I find myself going to my clients' houses with my smartphone so that we can appear together. And I think, that's a hodgepodge way of doing it, but that's what we found we had to do. In the very beginning of the pandemic, as many of you may have experienced, some of the basic government services really came into play. We predominantly have stopped using the Postal Service as the way of serving people because of that. And there have been many other situations like that, but we're working on it. So I hope that answers the question.
I believe Paul had some questions.
Yes, first of all, you'll be thanked by other people, but thank you so much for coming today. This was a very impactful presentation, and it's such wonderful work that you're doing. I mean, it really is God's work, and it's so important. And you seem to be doing it so effectively. That's great. I had a couple of questions. One is, I'll put a couple of questions out. You can answer what you want. I read on your website that you've extended into Bergen County and to Union County. And of course, we're in Union County, so that's close to home. So, how is that working out? Do you have different offices, satellite offices, different people, or is it all right? Whatever, you can talk about that a little bit. And the other question is, if any of our members are moved to want to do something to help, could you tell us? I mean, you're going to say go to the website and make a donation, but okay, you've got some materials here. So talk about that too. Thanks.
So we have this great position called resource navigators. They're actually staff people who are assigned to a county, and Union County has a man whose name is Joe Correa. Joe is, I think, originally from Ecuador. He's bilingual, so he's able to handle questions and needs from Spanish-speaking people. As Amy said, most of the dynamic still happens via the web, so there's no need to have an in-person person anywhere. They can connect with clients on Zoom and have those conversations, and then Joe interfaces that way with the necessary agencies. We have a person, more than one actually, in Hudson. We have a person in Bergen. The only place we don't have someone yet is in Essex, for sure, because Essex has another organization that handles a lot of what they do, but as the need grows, it's there. And I think, if I'm not mistaken, Joe told me that Union County has 50 plus cases, clients, people he's handling with respect to housing issues. I would presume that a number of those are housed in Elizabeth, but I'm not sure. I was intrigued, by the way, when I asked the resource navigators, where are the pockets of the needs? And first, to know that we had a person that worked in Bergen was eye-opening for me. And then when I asked what specific cities, Inglewood was one of them, which I found surprising, Lodi, Hackensack. So there are some places that we might presume the need doesn't exist, which in fact is not really true. There's need everywhere. I would say there's probably even need in New Providence and Summit, for sure. Our fundraisers, Amy said, we have one fundraiser a year. It's actually coming up. It's always at the same place, Maritime Park. It's an incredible venue. It's on the waterfront in Jersey City. You have the backdrop of New York City. People have never been to the big city get the benefit of both. It's November 10th. On the side table here, I put some cards that give easy access if you want or were inclined to help. And I have one of the sample cards that we've sent through the networks that we have that get people information in their hands. Because as Amy alluded to, many of our clients don't know or can't access the internet and oftentimes can miss an opportunity. So trying to put these cards in community leaders' hands, in churches, in civic organizations that if someone raises a concern, they say, take this, call that person, you might be able to find some quick assistance. So the network continues to grow. And if you do 2 things in one day, you have 2 more things the next day. And getting the message out is really a full-time job plus.
Anyone online, Joel?
No.
I know. Jim Blinn had a question.
Yes, you spoke. Am I close enough now?
Perfect.
All right. So you talked about a group in the senior housing that you met together with them and listened to them, and then you came up with a plan. You left me wondering, tell me a little bit more about that if you could.
So the plan started with us going to the local housing authority, which had given a series of vouchers to some of these folks to reduce the expenses, and finding out what was available. And now we're meeting with the landlord and negotiating a broad spanning agreement about how much the rents can be raised and what's fair and equitable. We're using our rent control law, which is part of the piece of that. And then we're also using some tools we have to subsidize. So it's some combination of carrot and stick is what I would say.
Ken Lindhorst has a question.
I'm sure you have your hands full with housing issues, but what happens if someone comes to you with a minor criminal issue or other domestic issues? How do you handle those?
So thank you for asking, because criminal issues are close to my heart on these things. I don't know how much folks know about the criminal law in New Jersey, but misdemeanors are handled actually in a civil environment. And so there isn't a right to counsel in the same way that there is in other states for those cases. So I have a network of folks that I work with to try and help people with those cases. We've done some expungement work in partnership with other organizations in Jersey City and Hudson County to help people. There's a big move towards expunging particular marijuana cases right now. And we're able to do that work. That can be of tremendous benefit to folks who need to get back to work. So we've done quite a bit of that. There are other organizations that can help us out when it comes to major criminal cases, when it comes to other kinds of civil things. But we're always tempted to help with situations beyond what we can do. And my job is to look at the people who lead us and say, I have to understand what I can do and I can't. So we're trying to stay at what we're good at and to expand in measured ways. So that's been a challenge for me personally, but I think it's really important that we do what we're good at and that we rely on others who are good at that other work.
Anyone else online? No? No one else here? Well, I know you have obligations, so perhaps I'll turn it over to George in just a second. But as I was listening to both of you, I was reminded of a cartoon. I believe it was in the New Yorker magazine many years ago. It took place in an attorney's office, and a rather prosperous attorney was talking to a potential plaintiff. And he said, Mr. Jones, you have a strong case. Tell me, how much justice can you afford? And it is so good to know that the two of you are helping to tilt the scales in terms of the economically disadvantaged. Thank you for doing the Lord's work. And now George Classic will provide our formal thank you.
Amy and Father Bob, thank you for the interesting and informative presentation and all the good work you're doing for people in need. The Old Guard has two ways to thank you. First is a certificate of appreciation. You get a hard copy, but there's a copy up there on the screen. You will see that there's a symbol of an orchid on the certificate. When the Summit Old Guard was formed in 1930, a firm in Summit was the largest producer and distributor of orchid plants in the United States. Accordingly, the Old Guard adopted the orchid as its logo and symbol. The second way we have to thank you is with an Old Guard salute.